Welcome back. This is still the breakfast show here on Overt Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from the city of Lagos. Lagos is a center of excellence, the city that never sleeps. This is the political update segment here on Overt Radio breakfast show, and you can join us. We are currently streaming live on YouTube, Overt Radio Live. You can also watch past programs on Overt Radio on TikTok, overt.radio.lagos. Overt.radio.lagos, on X, Overt News, and also on X, Overt Radio Live, and on Instagram, Overt News. So that is where you'll be able to catch us live. We are currently streaming on our Zeno platform, zeno.fm/radio/Overt Radio. Yes, this segment, I'm continuing my series. Yesterday, knowing more about the 2026 Electoral Act, the amended 2026 Electoral Act. Remember that on February 19, 2026, President Tinubu, signs the amended Electoral Act, and he was committing himself to strengthening democracy. When during that signing ceremony. During that signing ceremony, the president said the essence of democracy is to have very solid brainstorming discussions committed to national development, nation building, and the stability of the nation. It is time that we have confidence in our systems. No matter how good the system is, it is managed by the people, promoted by the people, and the people finalize the result. Speaking on the controversy preceding its passage, President Tinubu affirmed that humans still have a significant role to play in finalizing results, as computers can't do everything, given that many aspects of the voting processes are still largely manual. And when you look at the crux of various arguments, maybe Nigerians should question our broadband capability. How technically sound are we today? How technically sound will we be tomorrow in answering the call, whether in real time or not? As long as you appear personally as a manual voter in any polling booth, a ballot paper is given to you manually. You decide in a corner and fingerprint the person you choose. You cast your vote without hindrance or interference. The president continues saying, ballots are subsequently counted manually. It is just the arithmetic accuracy that is entered into it from easy thinking. It is still manual, essentially. The transmission of that manual result is what we are looking at, and we need to avoid glitches, interference, and unnecessary hacking in this age of computer inquisitiveness. Nigeria will be there. This is the president speaking during the signing of the Electoral Acts of the amended Electoral Act 2026, February 19, 2026. All right. Yesterday, I took us through some of the provisions. I lost my internet. Let me see. All right, let's see if I can get it. All right, yesterday I took us through some of the provisions of the Electoral Act. I talked about Section 60, subsection 6, which talked about which prescribe no less than 6 months jail time or fine of not less than 500,000 for any presiding officer who willfully frustrate the electronic transmission. I also talked about Section 3 of that amended Act, Section 3, subsection 3, and then of that amended Act. I also talked about Section 47. Section 47, which provide the use of bimodal voter accreditation system, which is the BVAS. The BVAS is what authenticates, despite the fact that you have a voter's card. Despite the fact that you have a voter's card, doesn't mean that you'll be allowed to vote. First, the presiding officer will have to check if your registration is valid. Okay, despite your voter's card, yes, despite the fact that you approach the polling unit and you have been checked, your name appears on the register that was pasted, at the polling unit. After you must have checked your name in the INEC register, pasted, at the polling unit, you also need to present your voter's card. And what authenticates your voter's card, as enshrined in section 47 of the Electoral Act, what authenticates your voter's card is when that voter's card is being imputed in the biomodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, or any other technological device prescribed by the Independent National Electoral Commission for the purpose of voter accreditation. So you must be accredited. Despite the fact that your name appears, on the INEC register, pasted at the polling unit, you must also be accredited. That accreditation authenticates you as a valid voter. Okay, and who will do that? What will do that is the BVAS, as enshrined in section 47 of that act. Also, explaining that particular section, section 47 is explicit. Anyone intending to vote must present for accreditation. I said this earlier. Must present for accreditation and provide a permanent voter's card, which is a PVC. The law does not say PVC or downloadable PVC copy, and it does not redefine a downloadable printout as a PVC. In fact, a proposal so that is that. So you must present your PVC. Okay, section I also talked about yesterday too, about section 18 subsection 1, which says that the Electoral Act, in dealing with lost, damaged PVCs and other replacement, provide that nothing shall prevent a card owner from printing or downloadable replacement copy. Also, in section, I also talked about section 75 of the Electoral Act. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, retains the power to register political parties and determine the conditions under which associations or groups may attain party status within Nigeria political system. So INEC has the exclusive right, despite the fact that some people have taken some political parties to court, saying that court should not recognize a certain political party, saying that INEC rather should not recognize a certain political party or not. Now, section 75 of the Electoral Act 2026 says that INEC has the exclusive rights, has the power, retains the power to register political parties and determine the conditions under which associations or groups may attain party status within Nigerian political system. The section prescribes the formal procedure, documentation, and compliance requirements necessary for party registration, as well as provided for a fixed registration fees of 50 million naira. Okay, so I talked about that one yesterday. All right, now let's move to the next section after all these ones. So section 91, which I stopped yesterday. Section 91 empowers INEC to cap contributions by individuals to parties or candidates, and to demand source of fund information. A party exceeding the limit faces the fine of 10 million naira and forfeiture. An individual faces 5 times the amount in excesses of the prescribed limit. Section 92, candidate spending limit. Section 92 sets the maximum campaign expenditure a candidate may incur from the dates of notice of election to polling day. All caps are substantially higher than the 2022 Act. So INEC has the power to set the limits of how much a political candidate, a party candidate, should spend during campaigns. Now, for the president, in section the Electoral Act 2026 cap that a presidential candidate must not exceed the sum of 10 billion. 10 billion. A presidential candidate must not spend more than 10 billion in election campaign. A presidential candidate must not spend more than 10 billion while campaigning for election. Now, for the governorship candidates, it is 3 billion naira. A governorship candidate must not spend more than 3 billion in campaigning for the governorship election. As a senator, the maximum that you can spend is 500 million. That's as a senator. For a House of Representatives, the maximum you can spend for campaign is 250 million. This is section 92 of the Electoral Act. For area council chairmanship, you cannot spend more than 100 million. Okay, State House of Assembly 100 million. Area council councillorship is 10 million. While donation cap, so individuals can donate. If you're a businessman and you think that this political candidate, has the ability, has the political will to execute the things in the community or in the country or in the state. So as an individual, let's say for example, if Dangote want to support any of the presidential candidates, okay, if Tony Elumelu want to support any of the presidential candidate or governorship candidate or any political candidate at all, if a businessman or a businesswoman wants to support the election campaign of any of these offices, of any individuals that are in any of these offices, that businessman, that businesswoman cannot donate more than 500 million. That is what section 92 of the Electoral Act 2026 says. If you are an individual, you cannot donate more than 500 million to any political candidates. Okay, a presidential candidate cannot spend more than 10 billion during campaign. A governorship candidate must not spend more than 3 billion. A senator cannot spend more than 500 million. A House of Representatives candidate cannot spend more than 250 million. State Houses of Assembly candidates cannot spend more than 100 million. Area council chairmanship, that is for if you are vying for the local government chairman of your in your local government, you cannot spend more than 100 million. Okay, 100 million. Area council councillorship for councillors, for ward councillors, they cannot spend more than 10 million. And also those who want to donate to these people, they cannot donate more than 500 million. Okay, that is what the Electoral Act, section 92 of the Electoral Act. Now, what is the implications for the 2027 elections? What is the implication? This new provision, the amended Electoral Act 2026, what is the implication for 2027 election? Now, section 60 subsection 3 of the Electoral Act has significant legal and operational implications because it moves the duty of electronic transmission from INEC's general discretion to a specific statutory obligations on the presiding officer at each polling unit. This is one of the implications. Now, remember in section 60 subsection 3 of the Electoral Act 2026, which now mandates INEC to transmit election results, to the INEC, to the IREV, that's the INEC registration, INEC results, portal, INEC result voters portal. Now, this section mandates INEC to transmit results to the IREV portal, which means that states that in explanation that immediately voting has been concluded, immediately voting result has been collated, and all party agents agreed that this is the result from this polling unit, that result will be snapped from the form EC8A, will be snapped and transmitted, uploaded to the IRF portal for the viewing public. But in the 2022 Electoral Act, according to what I read yesterday, the Supreme Court said that the IRF portal should not be presented in courts as illegal evidence. But now the Electoral Act now says that if there is any aggrieved candidate that feels he or she was cheated, now this Electoral Act says that the candidate can go to the IRF portal and tender the results in court. So now the implication for this is that what section 60 subsection 3 is saying of the Electoral Act is saying is that the significance is that legal and operational implication, because it moves the duty of electronic transmission from INEC's general discretion to a specific statutory obligations on the presiding officer at each polling unit. That is to say that a presiding officer can decide either to upload results to the IRF portal. This is the conflicting part of that act. Remember, the act says that it has mandated INEC that results must now be uploaded. But the caveat there is that in case of technical glitches, in case if there is no network in that particular polling unit, the presiding officer can now decide not to upload results on the IRF. But Nigerians are demanded that irrespective of the technical glitch, we want this result uploaded so that the public can have access to it. All right. The obligations is now personal and mandatory, not discretionary. Failure to transmit results as required constitute a breach of a statutory duty, which could attract administrative, criminal, or disciplinary sanctions. It also becomes relevant. It also becomes relevant evidence in any election petition. If a presiding officer fails to comply, the omission can be used to challenge the validity of that unit's results. You understand this? Okay. Now, another implications for the 2027 election in the Electoral Act, the reduction, that's the funding timeline shortened. The reduction of the election funding timeline from 12 months to 6 months before the polls are introduced by Section 3 of the Electoral Act 2026 has both practical and institutional implications for the next general elections in Nigeria. Remember, in the 2022 Act, governments are bound to disburse fund to INEC within 12 months of election. For instance, if the 2027 election were to start, if the 2027 election date was fixed for July next year, the 2022 Act mandates that INEC should receive fund to execute most of the things needed within 1 year, within 12 months. But in the 2026 Electoral Act, it was stated that fund will be given to INEC within 6 months. And this will create a lot of constraint. Okay, INEC will not have the time. Okay, when will INEC receive the money? What are the things that INEC will need? What about procurement? Because most of these materials are not locally provided, are not locally sourced. These materials need to be ordered in foreign countries, then before bringing them down here to Nigeria, before they've been imported into the country. So this is one of the significant, this is one of the implications, that the time constraint for funding is another thing that has, that will be a problem, that a possibility that will be a problem for INEC in the 2027 election. The new provision requires that INEC must receive all election funds at least 6 months before the elections. This change is meant to give INEC greater financial autonomy and ensure that funds are legally guaranteed rather than released at the discretion of the government. In theory, this should strengthen INEC's independence and make it more accountable, for planning. Yes, despite the fact that apart from the 12 months in the 2022 Act, now in the 2026 Act it is 6 months. Okay, now it now gives INEC the liberty, the financial autonomy to do what they want to do as regards to the fund, given to them. And it now puts INEC on a hot seat that whatever budget that it presented to the government or to the National Assembly for approval for the execution of election, INEC should be made accountable to every penny that will be spent or that was spent for the execution of the 2027 election. However, in practical terms, the shorter funding window also reduces the time available for thorough election preparation, which I stated earlier. INEC's activities such as procurement, logistics, training, and ad hoc staff, configuration of the beavers devices, and voter education. So, if INEC had received fund 6 months to the election, what time do they have to procure the things that they want to use for election? Logistics. What time do they have? Training of ad hoc staff. What time do they have to train? Recruitment of ad hoc staff. What time do they have to do all that? Compressing the time to 6 months may make it harder to complete all critical tasks efficiently, especially in a country where procurement process and infrastructure challenges often cause delays. So, yes, INEC has been given the financial autonomy, but that financial autonomy is constrained with time. So, this is where we find ourselves in the country. All right. Now, another point again as regards to funding timeline shortened, the change also carries a political dimension. While it improves transparency by providing a definite time frame for releasing funds, it could expose INEC to financial uncertainty if budgetary bottlenecks persist. The 2027 general elections will therefore test how well INEC can manage operational planning under tighter financial constraints. Yes, INEC has been given financial autonomy, but it now puts INEC, is now putting INEC to test that if money is released to you within 6 months to the election, how well will you be able, to get all the things you want to get, to train the ad hoc staff. In fact, recruiting first is the most important thing. After recruitment, training. After training, deployment. Another implications is campaign finance and spending limits. The tenfold increase in the individual donation cap from 50 million to 500 million. Remember, in the 2022 Act, like I stated earlier, in the 2022 Act, individuals can donate to candidates 50 million. But now, it has been increased to 500 million. Now, what is the implication? It significantly increases the influence of donors on candidates without robust enforcement of disclosure requirement under Section 93. This risks accelerating the monetization of elections under a veneer of legality. So, those, for instance, now, if you are a fresh senator, somebody who this will be your first time of campaigning. This will be your first time of campaigning for the senator in your community. and you don't have money, and somebody who is financially buoyant says, okay, let me give you this 500 million for you to execute your campaign. Okay, remember, the person might not be giving you as a grant. He might loan that money to you, and when you get into office, the first thing you'll be thinking is how you'll be able to repay that person that sponsored your election campaign. The first thing you'll be doing is how you'll be able to repay that person that, bankroll your election campaign. And this also gives a crack to corruption among our political office holders. This gives an open space for corruption. And for it, of course, our legislators, they get constituency allowance. They get money to execute their, various needs in their constituency. You will want to secure that first to pay the person that sponsored your election campaign before you go ahead to start, executing constituency projects. So what this implies, which is the spending limit, it risks accelerating the monetization of elections under a venal legality. Another implications again in section 84 subsection 2 recognizes only two methods of nomination: direct primaries and consensus. Direct primaries and consensus. Remember, this consensus of a thing almost caused a problem within the APC. Parties can no longer legally nominate candidates through delegate convention. I remember those days in the 2023 election. Prior to the 2023 election, in 2022, when APC had their delegates convention at Eagle Square, after that PDP did theirs, after that other parties did theirs, whereby all the party members across the 36 states of the federation, delegates now, these are people that were nominated to represent them, to vote for the candidates of their party. Now, in section 84, subsection 2, it recognizes only two methods of nomination: direct primaries and consensus. Remember, in the 2022 Act, we had the direct primaries and indirect primaries, and also the consensus mode of choosing candidates. But now in the 2026 Act, section 84 subsection 2, parties can no longer legally nominate candidates through delegate conventions. The removal may significantly alter internal party power dynamics and campaign strategies. So that is why in some parties, some members were aggrieved. And a party aspirant will spend so much to buy nomination interest and nomination forms. And after they've done that, they find out that they've been schemed out of the process. Section 84 subsection 2 of the Electoral Act allows political parties to nominate their candidates only through direct primaries or consensus. This change removes the use of delegates or indirect primaries that had often been criticized for manipulation, vote buying, and lack of internal democracy. In practical terms, this reform will directly shape how political parties prepare for the 2027 general elections. With direct primaries, all registered party members are expected to vote directly to the aspirant for their choice across wards and local government areas. This could increase participation and legitimacy because party members, not selected delegates, determine who becomes a candidate. So this has now put power into the hands of party members. Unlike before, delegates were nominated, to go to the convention to vote or nominate who, to vote for the candidates of their party. But now, with this with the inclusion of the nomination method, direct and direct primaries and consensus, it now gives power to party members to vote for who they want to be to vote for the candidate that will represent them in any elective post in their party. So tomorrow again I will continue, and I will also be looking at the implications as well. And what I will be looking at here is, the justification of this. Okay, the justification of all this, all the provisions in the 2026 Electoral Act. All right, Lagos, thank you for listening. I hope you've learned one or two things in the provisions in the 2026 Electoral Act amended. All right, tomorrow I'll come your way again, same time tomorrow. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Overt Radio.